James Williams joins us. He's got a great blog, if you haven't checked it out, Drifting Through the Grift, everything you want to know about the media and Georgia politics. James, thank you so much for stopping by South Georgia today.
It's my pleasure to be on with you, Bill.
Well, it looks like everybody in Atlanta has survived snowpocalypse, from what we understand. We're hearing a lot of media reports of the aftermath regarding it. You did an extensive piece on your blog with what's going on with that aftermath. What are some of the main things that went wrong with handling the snow in Atlanta this past week?
Well, I think now that we've had time to assess, we're finding that there was really two main things that went wrong. The thing that I believe really was exacerbated with this was that we don't appear to have any sort of traffic flow plan for getting people out of the city. People, frankly, did not know where to go, and they did not have people telling them where to go. So everybody took their normal routes home or to school, and that led to the logjam on the interstates. But what we're finding out now also is that perhaps GEMA, the Georgia Emergency Management Agency, did not take the weather reports as seriously as they possibly could have, or early enough, and started shifting resources, and more importantly, started notifying the public that this was a very serious event. They did not have their center fully activated until the afternoon of the event. They didn't issue any warnings that morning. And if I'm a business owner, I might have a difficult time making a decision to shut down for a day if it appears that the top agency responsible for these types of things was not issuing alerts and didn't seem to be taking it seriously. So that is ultimately where I think we've got to look is GMA, their response, and how early that started.
We hear this a lot from the national media in the last couple of years here, especially coming in regard to weather events, where you see hyping of the weather, naming winter storms now, making huge deals of tropical depressions, talking about I'm trying to remember, was it the winter vortex that they were talking about at one point in time? Does that play into it where people might say, you know what, here they are hyping it once again, but then all of a sudden it is real? And do you think that plays any part into this?
I think it does. And I think it's very difficult in Atlanta because we don't get these events very often. And many times, as you know, down there in South Georgia, and I grew up in Moultrie in South Georgia, these types of events are not only rare, but they're very difficult to tell exactly where and when the impact is going to be. And it's a fine line that you have to walk of not crying wolf, but also getting the public prepared. And I think that plays into it. I think the psychology, particularly here in Atlanta, sometimes people hear Storm Watch 2014 12 times, and they're not really affected. And then the 13th time, it really is a major event, and they don't take it seriously. So I think that although I think the Weather Service and the meteorologists did an excellent job in this storm, I think it would be wise for them to review their methods too and how they communicate to the public so that they can give the public as accurate a picture as possible of what potential impacts are. And honestly, I think what everyone learned during this is these are difficult decisions, but even Governor Deal admitted that I think you have to err on the side of being aggressive with telling people exactly what the potential is.
Let's talk a little bit about the political fallout from this, from Governor Deal and also Mayor Reed. Governor Deal says that the storm was unexpected. Did he get plenty of warning in regard to it?
He did, but a lot of that depends on how you define plenty. The National Weather Service upgraded the Atlanta area to an advisory at 11 o'clock on Sunday night, but then at 4 a.m. on Monday night. At 4 a.m. on Tuesday morning, they upgraded it to a warning. And a warning means that there's going to be severe impact. So at 4 a.m., the leadership had plenty of warning that this was going to be a serious situation and had hours to start notifying people. And this is the problem, is that there were no alerts sent out. There were no civic alerts sent out saying that this is coming. And then I think we're going to find out more details about where trucks were positioned and things like that. So if you consider, say, 6 hours, which is essentially what they had from the last warning, sufficient time, then yes, they did have plenty of warning. It was not unexpected. And the important thing I think to remember here is what I was saying earlier. We all know, we've been through this before. These storms, 50 miles can make a huge difference as to whether there's an impact or not. This storm was tracking north for the past 3 or 4 days. At that point, someone should have said, we need to keep a very close eye on this. And when that final warning came in, someone should have been prepared to sound the buzzer to say, we need to take this seriously and start taking action.
You had something very interesting in your article about how people rely on the National Weather Service, especially government officials. Tell me a little bit about AccuWeather's prediction compared to the National Weather Service's prediction, and should government officials also be listening to AccuWeather along with the National Weather Service?
I think if I was a government official, I would listen to anybody I could. I think the more data you have in a situation like this, the better you're able to make a judgment. But I think the real problem here is not that the National Weather Service got anything wrong and AccuWeather got something right. National Weather Service tends to be a bit conservative in some of their predictions because they know that government officials listen to them and they know the potential impact of getting something wrong. The real problem here is the way the National Weather Service and the state communicates. It is basically the state gets the same bulletins that we all get. They also get daily briefings. And if you look at the daily briefings, the ones on Monday afternoon were fairly vague. It said some parts of the metro area. It didn't say specifically the entire metro, particularly the northern arc, was going to be impacted. What we really need to look at here is in weather events, how is that relationship handled? And really the state needs someone who is there at all times with a meteorological background, with a weather forecasting background, saying, okay, this is what is happening now, here is what this means, instead of just getting alerts that are filled with scientific nomenclature that are difficult to interpret.
Tell me a little bit about the decisions of the Fulton County School Superintendent and how that created a domino effect with schools closing, schools, I guess, staying open and not closing, and how did that play?
Well, I said Fulton County in my article. I could have easily included Cobb and DeKalb County as well. I said Fulton County because Fulton is the largest school system. Also, at least in my opinion, the areas affected were mostly North Fulton, and so those parents trying to get home to those kids, my belief, and this is just based on what we've seen so far, I hope we will learn more, is that maybe triggered a domino effect, because if kids are home from school, then parents stay home from school. They work from home. People do not go into work. And so I think it may have exacerbated how many people were on the roads. But that was not just limited to Fulton County. We should be clear about that. There were several school districts that did stay open. And once again, you go back to that original point that they all had that warning at 4 a.m., and I'm not saying that they made the wrong call. Based on what we know now, it seems that they made the wrong call. We need a better explanation of they had the warning in hand at 4 a.m. that morning. Why did they make that decision? There may be circumstances that we don't know yet, but we need them to explain that.
Is the media right now trying too hard to put all the blame on Governor Deal? It almost reminds me, in a way, maybe not exactly, but how Katrina, they tried to nail it to George W. Bush, and it seemed to stick. There's a lot of media interest to thwart his reelection coming up in 2014. Are they trying too hard right now to put all the blame on Governor Deal, or is there some legitimate blame that he is responsible for?
Well, Governor Deal said himself that the buck stops with him. I don't believe that the media is purposely trying to tag him with it. I think that the media could do a better job of explaining exactly what the patchwork of municipalities is in Atlanta and how difficult it is to coordinate all of that. But ultimately, you have to believe here that the one person or the one entity that would have the ability to coordinate across 60 different counties, cities, school districts, and everything is the state of Georgia. And ultimately, he is the leader of the state of Georgia. GEMA is under his control. So I think criticism is fair at this point. But I do wish that the media would do a better job of explaining exactly how difficult that is, and that Atlanta is not just a dot on the map. It is a gigantic metro region with many, many leaders who are making many decisions that affected this.
How much does Mayor Reed, how much responsibility does he have with this mess?
I think Mayor Reed is in an unfortunate position because of what I was just talking about. When we say Atlanta, and more importantly, when the national media says Atlanta, they are not talking about the 500,000 people within the city limits of Atlanta. They are talking about the 6 million people in the region. And the most prominent face of that is Mayor Kasim Reed. And that is why he has been out in front of the press and why he has taken a bit of a beating on that. But I think once we have a little time to reflect on this, what we're going to see is compared to 2011, when inside the city limits of Atlanta, which I lived in at the time, you literally could not move for 4 days. Now, I'm not downplaying what happened the other day, but the fact of the matter is within the city limits of Atlanta, the streets were relatively clean and the city stayed functional. The problem happened outside the city limits of Atlanta along I-75 in the northern arc, and Mayor Reed literally has no control over that.
One of the things that people are talking a lot about is this award luncheon that the governor and the mayor of Atlanta were at while all this chaos was going on around them. Maybe you could touch a little bit upon that situation, too.
Sure. Well, from a political perspective, I would have to say it was a pretty terrible mistake. The story that I like to tell for some of your older listeners, you may remember Hurricane Betsy in 1965. Lyndon Johnson flew down to New Orleans, and he stood in the middle of Jackson Square, New Orleans, in pitch dark with a microphone saying, "I'm your president, and I'm here." In a disaster, from a political perspective, it is mostly about managing perception. And right now, we're going to see a lot of pictures of Mayor Reed and Governor Deal smiling, unveiling a portrait at noon at the time when about 1 million people were trying to escape the city. It shows that, once again, that was saying something terrible is coming and we need somebody at the helm. And that is a terrible perception for any leader to have. So both Governor and Mayor Reed may suffer a bit for that.
Getting back to the governor, it's this is just totally anecdotal on my part. Maybe you have some insight on this, but it seems like as far as the reelection of Governor Deal, he seems to be almost unstoppable. Even though people are not happy with T-Splosh, there's plenty of Republicans and conservatives that are not happy with the way he has handled the Common Core initiatives in public schools. And you just kind of wonder if this is another thing that they're going to circle the wagons with him, and they're not going to sign any political blame. How do you predict this playing out here for 2014 for his reelection?
Well, I think Governor Deal is fortunate in the timing. If the election was held next week, he'd be in a lot of trouble. But we're not going to have an election for 8 months, and 3 or 4 months from now, we're all going to be in shorts and flip-flops and talking about going to the beach. And we won't forget this incident. But the impact will not be nearly as severe, and I don't think it will affect him greatly, but I think that remains to be seen. I think we need to watch this over the next several months, and I can assure you that in the fall, whether it is, or actually coming up in May, whether it is in the Republican primary or in the fall in the general election, there will be ads with that picture of him at that awards luncheon, and that will hurt. Is it enough to swing an election? I don't believe so, but this is not the last time we will hear of this storm.
You mentioned at the end of your article, and I think this is true, everybody's making this point, is that it's not a weather problem in Atlanta, it is a traffic problem, and this goes back to the whole T-Splosh debacle and not getting anywhere with making improvements to the infrastructure to Atlanta. Where does this debate go after an incident like this?
Well, I think that it's going to be revisited, and I think that had already started even before the storm hit. I will give a little plug here to a friend of mine who just started a group called Policy Best. It's headed up by Charlie Harper, who is a Republican, and he and his group are making an attempt to bring together all of the people that were involved in T-Splosh. And we're talking about people that normally do not get in a room together, like Sierra, Tea Party, Chamber of Commerce. And we've got to seriously revisit this. And it's not about satisfying everybody, and it's not just about transit, and it's not just about roads. It's about coming to a consensus. And we got a very good example the other day of exactly what this problem is. It's not 30 minutes added onto your commute. It's if something terrible happens, we have no way to get people out of the city, and that's mostly due to the transit infrastructure. But what we need is a bunch of smart people in a room saying, here's the problem, here's how we tackle it, in both a fiscally sound manner, in an efficient manner, but in an effective manner. And we haven't done that for years, and now we're paying the price.
This is on the tip of my tongue here, James, and I'm trying to remember the name of this group here because it just came to my mind. I think during the whole T-Splosh debacle, I believe it was either the Georgia Public Policy Center or a think group like that came up with a lot of cost-effective ideas to help with the infrastructure in Atlanta with transportation. I don't know if you can read my mind on this or not, but if you're familiar with the organization I might be referring to here.
It was probably the Georgia Public Policy Foundation, and I don't recall exactly what they proposed. But, the T-Splosh, one of the problems with it is exactly some of the things we've been talking about. It's a bit like herding cats up here in Atlanta. Like I said, you have 60 different entities that you have to satisfy, and we're getting more every day for reasons we won't get into now. But, there's more. The cities are popping up like mushrooms in a cow pasture after a hard rain. The problem is getting all these people together, finding a way to not come to agreement, but to come to consensus on how to fund, how to build, where to put, and most importantly, we need to start relying on the people that do this and are experts. As I said in my article, the first thing I would do if I was in charge, I'd find the 12 smartest traffic engineers in the state. I'd throw them in a room, get them some pizzas, and say, you're not coming out until you got a plan.
Awesome. Thank you so much. James Williams, you got a great blog, Drifting Through the Grift. You got a lot of great stories. Tell us a little bit about how we can find your blog and what you usually talk about.
Sure. You can find my blog at griftdrift.com. That's GRIFTDRIFT.com. I mostly talk about politics and media in Georgia. I try to keep it objective and critical of everyone. Mostly I'm looking for interesting things, and as we know, politics and politicians in Georgia, they're never short of interesting stories.
That's for sure. James, thank you so much. Have a great day.
You too, Bill.